Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm a can of Coke.
And today we're actually going to be addressing something called the extended mind hypothesis, which you can probably see on stream because I've got the wrong tab open.
I wondered what was going on. I thought it was just a new style we were going with.
Yeah. Well, let's go with that. Yeah, I did it intentionally. It's not because I'm completely sleep deprived, and I can't even think of a metaphor or simile or whatever I was going for. Yeah.
That's all right. I'm pretty much the same, so this will be a fun stream.
I've reached the stage where everything's starting to go a little bit liquid. Everything that you're looking at, and as soon as you stop and stare at something, it's all like, ooh, oh look, I just found a spider on my mic. Look at that. Sorry. Yeah, so hopefully today we can manage to do a stream that's adequate for you all, but please be aware there will probably be some performance errors. Less intentional than usual.
And not just from the computers.
Yeah. So tonight, yes, we're going to be covering off the extended mind hypothesis. We also had a few comments come in before the stream, so I need to remember to read those out once we've had a little discussion. And obviously, any questions that come in through the chat we'll address as we go along, or at least at any point where it is free for us to do so. So, Dave, do you want to take us away and tell us basically what the extended mind hypothesis is?
Yeah, it's quite a simple one and quite a straightforward one, but kind of an interesting one. And it comes from David Chalmers, who you probably recognize from the P-zombie argument. Yeah, from the people with no inner monologues argument. And he's also well known in the philosophy of mind in general. And Andy Clark, who's a British philosopher well known in the philosophy of mind. And what it is, it's an argument that our mind doesn't just consist of what's in our skulls, like in the flesh around our head and in our skulls. It's not just our brain. The mind actually extends in an external way to objects that exist outside. And those objects outside of our mind are part of our cognitive processes.
So when you say they're part of our cognitive processes, how do you actually mean by that? Do you mean when I'm using a pen, I consider how I'm going to use the pen, or is it something else?
It's a little bit different than that. So if you imagine what a belief is just this proposition that we take to be true.
Mm-hmm.
So now imagine you have like a diary planner. So it's like an appointment calendar type thing.
Right, yeah.
And you have written down, sorry, can you hear the dog barking?
Yeah, I can.
I'm sorry. I'll push the door closed in a minute. Yeah. So you have this written down in your appointment calendar that you have this appointment in 2 weeks. Is that a belief that exists outside of your head?
No.
And so when you look at it, it becomes part of the cognitive processes that's formed. It's sort of like a coupling of your cognitive process and the external world, because that external world, the thing in the external world affects your cognitive states and becomes part of the forming of that mental state.
Yeah, I suppose that sort of makes sense. I'd say that, I mean, it reminds you that there's this appointment. So in the first instance, you have booked an appointment and you believe you have an appointment and you believe that you need to probably remember the appointment or that you might forget the appointment. So you write it down because writing things down helps us remember, even if we don't read the thing again. So that's part of the cognitive process in a way, writing it down. And then obviously, if you're a very busy person or you've got a brain like mine, constantly going through checking your day planner will remind you going, oh yeah, I've got this thing. And then you might have forgotten that you had that belief that you had an appointment. And then it reminds you you have a belief that you've got an appointment. But is that really the same thing?
Well, there's one of the things that Chalmers and Clark points out. We could consider that appointment written down a standing state belief. So we have two different kinds of beliefs. We have what are known as standing state beliefs, which are beliefs that are inactive at the moment. And our mind and our brain is filled with those kind of beliefs. We barely have access to any of our beliefs in a conscious way until they become what are known as occurrent beliefs, which are beliefs that are active in the mind. And oftentimes, it's something that will trigger those beliefs in our brain. That's what brings them to the forefront. Like, we might smell a certain smell and remember our favorite food, or remember a day that we had in the past that we really enjoyed. But just like all of our standing state beliefs, the item in the book, in the diary planner, is a standing state belief. It doesn't become a current until we look at it.
Yeah. But that belief still even existing within your mind at that time? How can we actually track if that belief is in our mind, or it's just the memory of having that belief at some point? So when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I remember, and then you hold it again and it's a fresh thing.
Yeah. But what is the relevant difference?
There probably is no relevant difference. I'm just asking if it's the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the point though. Where is the relevant difference between a belief that is in a standing state and an item written in the diary that brings it to forefront? It's still a proposition that's true.
Yeah.
And it's a proposition we accept as true, but we just don't recall it until we see it.
We're not consciously processing it.
Yeah. And not all of our mental states are conscious mental states. Like, we can make a cup of tea without thinking about it.
Agreed. I quite often can get to the local One Stop, which is basically a corner shop, except it's not on the corner, without even thinking about it. I stick my headphones in and I walk, and then I go, "Oh, I'm at the shop."
Yeah. And when you go to that shop and you have a list of things in your mind, but sometimes you'll see an object that you go, oh shit, yeah, we haven't got that in the house.
Yeah, agreed.
So has that object that you've seen, is that coupled with the cognitive process and a part of the actual cognitive process that creates the mental state? And therefore that object is part of the mental state of remembering.
I'd say it's definitely a device that helps you remember.
Like a trigger.
Yeah. But I don't know if I'd regard it as part of the mental state, because to me the mental state is the stuff that's happening in here. But maybe I've got a too narrow view on that.
I hold a similar kind of view. I think it might be a tool to help the mental state come about, but I'm not sure I consider it part of the mental state. But it's a very interesting idea, because theoretically, what is the difference between that belief that sat in the back of your mind doing nothing, and this idea that a book will or a shopping list will tell you that you need to remember that thing. That shopping list is still like a standing state belief, and it doesn't become a current belief until you read the shopping list.
Yeah.
Just as this standing state belief that you need such and such in the house doesn't become a current thing until you see the item on the shelf.
Kind of like storing your beliefs on an external hard drive.
Yeah, and then plugging it in through a USB port. Well, that's one of the ideas as well. In the future, we may be able to upgrade our brains in such a way that we can have devices fitted that help expand our memory. So if they're inside the brain and it's a chip that helps form the mental states, are they part of the mental state?
Or if it's a direct interaction with the brain, almost definitely, yeah. I'm still hung up on the electrical process going on in the brain, and if there's a device connected to your brain influencing that process, then it's definitely part of that cognitive process. But
is it part of the mental state though, because it's an external object that the mental state is getting information from?
Yeah, you're right. I wouldn't, unless you had a completely cybernetic brain, but then that's going too far off piste, I reckon. But if it was just a device that influenced the mental state, then yes, it'd be part of the cognitive process, but not the mental state, because it's directly there. But yeah.
And then what's the relevant difference between a notebook containing a date with the information and the chip inside your brain forming that cognitive state?
Yeah, realistically, there isn't much of one in that regard. It's the physical, the proximity of it. It's the fact that something's attached to you and sending and receiving data direct to your brain, rather than it going through the empirical process. Yeah. Oh, look, I'm reading this. Oh, it says this. Oh, yes, that's because of that. It is slightly different, but it's not as different as you think it is when you think about it. Because
once you start trying to pick out the relevant differences, it's like, well, okay.
Actually, yeah, I mean, because when you think about it, I've got a notepad here, and I can see this, and I feel like this is completely different to having something that, an electrode in my brain doing it. But as you say, the relevant difference, it's not that much. It's just the experience of it is that little bit different. But is that relevant enough to say it's not close enough to being the same thing?
Well, that's one of the ideas that's brought up by Tim Crane, in that maybe that is one of the relevant differences. So if you had this chip in your head, it would just be like an instant recall.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have to look at the piece of paper. You wouldn't have to derive meaning from that piece of paper and then work out what that meaning is, and then that becomes the belief. With a regular belief, you don't have to derive meaning from it. It just comes to you. The whole meaning, the whole intent, and there's certain emotions that might come with it. Like, say, it's a meeting with a big boss and you've been called in 2 days and he's not told you what it's about, and you remember fucking up 6 months ago on some big project. That brings with it a certain sort of motivational aspect to that kind of memory and belief, which the diary doesn't have. So it might have the propositional content, so to speak, but it doesn't have the content that the memory would.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose it's, in a way, like when you discuss something someone else believes as well. Because that's not necessarily anything that you hold yourself. And that bit on the paper is equivalent to someone else holding a belief, and not necessarily you actually believing that thing yourself. The only difference is that paper triggers you to say, oh, actually, I do have that belief.
Yeah. And here's the thing as well. If somebody asked you about your belief, you could kind of express it in a way where it's a representation of the meaning that you have for that belief. So to give a good example, when you ask some, like the atheist who uses the lack of belief term, when I say I'm an atheist, because you know me, there comes with this certain content, like what I mean by it. But if it's just written on a piece of paper that you then pick up, and you don't know me particularly well, you can say, well, this is his belief, but actually infer a completely different meaning to what my belief is. Which you couldn't do if you said, are you an atheist? And I say, yes, I do not believe in God, or I believe God does not exist. Whereas the piece of paper would just say, I am an atheist.
Yeah. It's
and some of the meaning is lost in that transference of the belief.
Yeah. So, I mean, if as you're saying, we could actually have a list of beliefs written down, which I then pass on to someone else. They could even be a little bit more descriptive, I guess, as well. But it might not give you the whole picture. So, I mean, something you said just then, a little that you made when you said, well, I don't believe in gods. I know that when you say that, you mean I believe gods do not exist. But that's one of the things that is quite vague about saying, well, I don't believe this, because it's not talking about what you do believe or if you're suspending judgment on the proposition. So in that sense, if I write down, I don't believe in gods, so one person will go, well, you're some form of non-theist, but I don't know what kind. And the other person will go, well, no, you're an atheist. And then they will have a belief about your beliefs, but there wouldn't have been an accurate transference. And it's only through me knowing you, I know what you meant there. And I assume that the people listening to the stream knew what you meant there when you first said it. But there could be people listening that were like, well, I don't know who this guy is. And they might even be a bit confused about this definitional thing as well, which isn't the focus of the stream.
No. But you're right in that what's written on the piece of paper isn't quite the entirety of the content of the belief. It's just the proposition itself.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point about the belief about a belief, in that when we have beliefs in our head and we recall those beliefs, there isn't an extra step. We just recall the belief and we know that we believe it. Whereas with what's in the book, there's another belief that comes before it. The belief that what's written in the book is what you believe.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's you could say there's a whole selection from there that you believe that you wrote it. And you believe that it was accurate, at least at the time of writing it, and therefore, to be consistent, you then believe that thing again, rather than an instant recall. So again, you're drawing that point between the chip being there, giving you that instant, I believe this thing, to, well, oh yeah, well, this is my book, and I believe I write down my appointments in this book, and I believe that that's my handwriting, and so yeah. So
that
we could say that
like
that's
you
a
say,
relevant
there's the
difference.
whole wall of beliefs in between you and that belief before it actually becomes one of your beliefs.
Yeah. Whereas, I mean, a current belief that I think we both hold and we don't have to remind ourselves on is one you mentioned. We believe gods don't exist. And there'd be no point in us writing that down.
No.
But that's there, active in our mind. Whereas, if I see an appointment that I've written down, and as you say, there's that whole recall. And so there is that significant difference, or relevant difference, maybe not massively significant, but relevant difference between something actively held in your brain, a chip that's actively informing your mental state, and something where it's been written down.
Yeah. And
Equally,
I mean, Chalmers and Clark argue here that you're overcomplicating it by adding this extra step, because we don't add that when we just recall a belief. But I think there is a difference in kind there, not just a difference in type, but I think it is a difference in kind. Like what's written down in the book, all those steps do come into it that don't come into the actual mental recall. Like you don't need to believe that you believe this thing, because you just believe this thing and you recall that belief, and it informs your motivations and how you act and that kind of thing. Whereas the information in the book is motivated first by you reading the book.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, if we think about, say, articles that we've written in the past, and we could say that we definitely believed them at the time, but there might be some things when reading it, I might remember believing that thing, but no longer believe it as well. So again, There's a difference there, because something written down, you might not believe it. Let's go with the appointment again. Actually, between then, I got a phone call saying the appointment's been cancelled. I just didn't cancel it, the appointment. So I then read this and go, oh yeah, I've got that appointment. Wait, no, I don't. Where again, if there was a chip in my brain that recalled all this information for me, it would have cancelled it, and there wouldn't be that, issue.
That extra step in, the misalignment between what's in the book and you. But to add a little depth to this, and this is the kind of depth, one of the things that Chalmers and Clark add onto it to say this is a stipulation of when it becomes a part of your cognitive process. Have you seen the film Memento?
Oh, I love it. Absolutely love it.
Okay, I've not actually seen it, but this is, I know enough about it where I can relate it to this. Now, this guy has problems storing information in his brain.
Spoilers!
Well, as far as I know, that's like a main plot point. So
yeah, no, it is. It's the whole movie.
Yeah, and he tattoos important things during the day as they come in onto his body.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's always with him, and he needs that to recall what his beliefs are, or to recall what he thinks, and recall what's happened to him. So they are always with him, and they are needed to actually form that cognitive state. Without those tattoos, he can't form that cognitive state.
No, that's true. The thing is there as well, it's a bit different because he doesn't actually have that cognitive state at all anymore. So he could he could jokingly write a lie down, or he could say, "You are Super Mario," right? And then he'd wake up and see the tattoo and go, "Oh fuck, I'm Super Mario," because that's purely what he based his belief on. He somehow knows enough. I mean, in fact, in the movie, it goes through, and he has the tiniest little bit of memory. But yeah, he can only keep basically until he gets distracted in his mind a lot of the time. So, which is why he has to constantly write this down.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that Chalmers and Clark say is important to being part of this extended mind hypothesis, in that it relies solely upon the information that he's tattooed on his body.
Yeah.
So all of his beliefs come from that.
Yeah.
So are those beliefs that are tattooed on his mind, on his body, his beliefs and a part of his mind?
They're definitely propositional content that he instantly accepts as true. The question is, they definitely inform his belief. So they are definitely part of his cognitive process.
And they motivate him as well, like a regular belief does.
But I mean, this is quite a unique case. I mean, if it was me, I'd probably say no, because I would deliberate this thing I've got written on my arm and gone, what, really? What? Why? Sort of thing. Whereas he doesn't have the ability to do that. So I don't know, if I'm honest.
That's it. That's where it gets tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the actual example that they used, because the paper was written in, I think it was 98, might be 96, but I'm pretty sure it's 98. They used the example of somebody with a form of dementia, like quite an advanced form of dementia. He can remember certain things, but mostly what he learns in the day that's going to be important or is important, he writes in a notebook. So before he does anything, or to remember his daughter's name, his daughter's phone number, he has to look in this notebook. That's basically what he can remember, to look into the notebook before. So everything he believes comes from that notebook, and everything he believes is written in that notebook. So in order to know what he believes, he needs that notebook. So are they a part of his mind? They form the cognitive processes. They are his memory, so to speak. So does his mind extend to that book?
He doesn't have, in that sense, as many secondary processes. He might have that initial, my beliefs are in here, but there isn't all the additional processes in the same way that we might have something written down and deliberate over it. I mean, there's things I would say that I'm more certain on. It's definitely a tool to help him remember, or to inform his mental state. It's part of the cognitive process.
But is it equivalent to the mental state? Is it a coupling of the mental state? That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know.
And for me, it's quite a tough one. I think it's, like I say, I think it's a really interesting idea, and it gets us thinking about how our minds work and how our minds, interact with the external world and how beliefs are formed. But I think it's more of a tool. I mean, you could argue as well that what's in that book motivates him. Imagine if he was going to the museum the next day, and it's written down in the book that he's going to the museum, but the address is also written in the book. So the only reason he knows that this museum is at 134th Pennington Avenue or whatever it is that it's written there, and that's how he knows to go there, and that motivates him to go to that address like any other belief would.
Yeah, it gets complex when you get to that point, doesn't it? It does. It's a bit more simple when you've got a less of a blank template in the brain, in the mind, I'm quite happy to say I don't think it is for you or I. Our notepad is a tool or whatever. Yeah, it's one of those things. I think I might sleep on it and go, maybe I've got a decent answer to this one now. I still lean towards it being a tool, but that's because I am largely using my own experience of it, and I do see it a little bit different. There is still an extra step in or two in the process than it being in the mind. There's not as many steps as there would be, so, but it is still a bit different.
Yeah, because, well, what's written in the book might motivate him. It's not what's in the book that motivates him as such. It's the belief that he should be motivated by the book that motivates him being motivated by the book.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I suppose what happens if he loses that belief, and let's just say something happens and he can't write anymore, so he doesn't even know that it's his own writing. He loses that motivation, and it loses its efficacy, and therefore, if they really were equivalent to the beliefs in the mind, then they wouldn't have the ability to lose their efficacy.
Okay. Can you remember what you believed about the weather this day last year?
We're in England, so it was shit.
Shit.
But no, in all seriousness, no, I can't remember what I believe.
There's lots of beliefs that go out of our mind, just like they would if somebody erased an entry in his book, or he forgot about what, he doesn't remember one of those beliefs in his book.
True. Although they're probably more simplistic beliefs than I believe that I need to feed the cat and that I'm,
But that could be in the book as well.
Yeah.
Feed the cat at 5 o'clock.
But you wouldn't. I mean, sometimes you can forget to feed your cat because cats are very aloof at times. But
yeah.
And actually, it can be them coming up and asking for food that reminds you. So maybe that's a bad example.
But it's quite a difficult one once you actually set your mind to it. Like, what are the relevant differences between something we have written in a book that we use as part of the cognitive process and just our memory recall informing that cognitive process? Think about when you were younger and you were doing math and you were counting on your hands and your knuckles. The counting on the hands and the knuckles is actually part of the cognitive process of you working it out. Those knuckles form part of the working out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. Especially if you know the 9 times table one.
Yeah.
I mean, if anyone doesn't know, it's you hold up 10 fingers and obviously maybe it's that way round in the camera, I'm not sure. Oh no, maybe that way. Yeah, okay. Sorry. But once 9 is 9, 2 9s are 18 and so on and so forth. It's in that regard you learn it. And at the start, it won't even be as simple as that. Like Dave said with the counting, you might go, oh yeah, well, what's 3 9s? And you go, well, there's a 2 there, 1 2, and 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Okay, so 3 9s are 2 7 27. So that really does form about part of the cognitive process, but you'd have got these beliefs in there that this is how to do it. Is it the same as the mental state? It's not the same as going, well, the square root of 196 is 14, because that is a belief that's fully held in your mind because it's a memory, but you also a memory that you believe.
Okay, let's throw in another one just to complicate it a little bit more.
All good.
Now, mental states are recognized by the functions that they perform, so to speak. Like, we feel our stomach rumble. We feel a bit peckish. That's the mental state. And a lot of our mental states are informed by the function that they perform, which is counting on your hands. That's the function it performs. So the book performs a function.
Yes, it's not a direct connection to us.
But it sort of is at the same time.
Yeah. Generally, with feeling hungry, though, that's an instant, oh, I'm hungry. Whereas, again, with the book, you open the book, you look at the book, and there's still a few more steps there. But yeah, no, I see what you mean. Especially when you throw the hands in. Like, I think when you put that in between the book, the hands, the stomach sort of thing, and then the chip in the brain and the brain itself, you sort of end up with a gradient.
Yeah.
And then you go, well,
that's
where's
why
the line?
I sort of...
Yeah. Where's the line in this gradient? Like, at what point? Interesting. We've had a comment come in from Kimo saying,
hey, Kimo.
I'm reminded of Rousseau's idea that the beliefs or convictions he'd arrive at in his 40s were the soundest he could ever hope to have. He wrote those beliefs down and swore to never vary his views. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Dave, have you changed any beliefs since your 40s?
I can't remember. I need a book to remind me. But yeah, of course I have. You know, I did my master's degree in my 40s and part of my undergrad in my 40s, so there was a lot that changed. And books perform part of that function of changing my mind and creating new beliefs. But also, so did my cognitive processes thinking about them. So is there a relevant difference between what I read in the book and me actually looking at them, assessing them, and then becoming part of?
Yeah, I'd say that with that, obviously, you're reading your
there's
material.
There's a difference.
Yeah, there's a big difference. I mean, you're reading someone else's journey planner, or
yeah,
or whatever it is. So, in that regard, you very very much are doing something different, especially as you've been reading something, and it might have had a very compelling argument, and you might have started to believe it, but then you might have read something else or thought on it a bit more with, in silo, or read it again and had a different process going on. Oh, but what about, how do I answer this? Well, let me look up information on this thing that's popped into my head, and okay. So yeah, again, it's influencing your beliefs. It's part of the process. But is it the mental state itself? No.
That's it. Okay. But to throw in something else here. Now, for the first few years, I relied heavily on my glossary so that I knew what the terms meant. I had a rough idea of what the terms meant. But in order to know exactly what the term meant, I needed to look in that book and in the glossary, and I've got the encyclopedia of philosophy up there and the dictionary of philosophy. So sometimes I need to look at them to know exactly what the word means. So is that me looking at that encyclopedia or dictionary? That's what I need to form that belief. But the belief is exactly what's in the book. So is that my belief?
It's assisting recall, though, isn't it?
But what if I'm not recalling and I'm just going to the book and using the information from that book? Because I know that what's in the book is correct, written by a philosopher who knows what he's talking about.
I mean, in the first instance, when you're looking up terminology, you'd say, yeah. I mean, we could turn it round a little bit. I program, as you know, and I can't. I don't hold all the language in my head, and especially when I start using a function. Like if there's a function that I rarely use, and I have to use it, I sometimes have to read up on it again. I actually just look at an example and I go, yes, that's how to do that. Or oh, I remember this, but I don't do that bit. I do it this way. But obviously, in the first instance, when you're looking up code, you have to have a resource that you trust to be providing you the correct code. You might have built that trust by trial and error of different places that you've been finding, or you might just go, well, yeah, I mean, this is a Microsoft document, so they know their software, and that's why I'm using this bit of code. So do I when I yeah, I think again it's a tool. It's not a belief, even though it informs my belief. There's still other beliefs around it that help it form my belief, even if the end result is exactly the same, much in the same way as when you're looking at your glossary. Much in the same way when I look up logical notation, because I know that I can't remember what this symbol is. Let me go to this wiki page. Oh yeah, silly me. That's the one it is.
But then, is that memory recall? You're looking to this bit of thing, this bit of information that tells you what it's supposed to be. Just like when you're trying to remember it in your head and it comes to you and says, no, you're supposed to be using the ampersand or up arrow, down arrow, So that looks, and that is your belief.
I mean, it's a representation of your belief.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it's actually your belief, because I'd say your belief is what you're holding to be true.
Is the psychological state. Yeah.
But it's definitely a big part of the process.
Yeah. And here's another interesting thing, is that we all have some false beliefs. We all have things we misremember and they're not quite accurate. So now, if you say the guy with the book, Otto, the dementia patient, say he's written down 134th instead of 143rd, he's created a false belief, which informs and motivates him. Just as, say, you're doing a logical notation thing and you look up the wrong page, you happen to look up a guy who thinks he knows what he's talking about, but doesn't know what he's talking about. So you go with that one.
Yes. Or you're scouring YouTube and you find some people that talk about epistemology and they really don't have a clue what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Again,
what they say,
it's still creating it. It's informing it. It's still
creating a new belief,
yeah,
rather than just simply being your belief.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's basically my view. External objects in the external world inform the cognitive process, rather than are a part of the cognitive process.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And as you say, when counting on your fingers, they're more a part of it than something informing it as such. Yeah, it's an interesting one to think about, really.
It's a good way to start thinking about where the mind ends, or whether the mind is more than just the brain states.
Yeah, I mean, you could go down a number of different paths with that, though, couldn't you? Yeah. So, are there any the well, I assume Chalmers and Clark hold that the notebook is
Coupled.
is a coupled
Yeah,
belief.
it's a pairing of the external world and the cognitive process.
Are there many that think it is?
I couldn't tell you the actual amount of numbers, unfortunately, but there's a lot of criticism of the idea because there seems to be what Chalmers is arguing is that what's in the notebook is the same type of thing as the mental state.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not. It's not just a difference in degree, it's a difference in kind.
No, agreed. Yeah, I was just wondering if it was something that was largely accepted. I mean, you can see under certain circumstances where you can be a bit more charitable with the idea. As we said, like the whole gradient of, at what point is it different?
At what point does red become blue?
Yeah. And obviously, from this end to this end, you can go, oh, yeah, well, they're clearly different. But when you get to that bit, you're like, oh, man, it's basically the same thing. And so,
yeah.
where do you actually draw the line? Even though you know either end, it's definitely different. Even maybe up to about here, but you get to that bit in the middle. Like,
that's where philosophy functions. That little bit in the middle where it's like, well, what is the conceptual difference?
So we had a couple of comments. I don't know if we've got any more, but I'll read out these two. Which, having had this conversation with you, I'm not entirely sure they're exactly relevant to the conversation, but they could also be fun to think about. So, is the diary of Anne Frank an extension of her mind? Obviously, she'd have written down what she believed. So, if we would be a little bit more, if it is actually an extension of mind, like we said, it's like having a hard drive for your beliefs that you're storing elsewhere. He says, would it be right to say that Anne Frank's mind exists, or at least the part of it she wrote in her diary?
Okay, with this one, I see huge differences between the idea of the extended mind hypothesis and the diary, because she's not using those for recall. They're not actually forming a part of the cognitive process. You could look at them as a dump of her thoughts. So they were what she was thinking at the time. She was describing what she was feeling, describing. So they're not really an extension of her mind, but a description of her experience.
But it's like we were talking about earlier, we could write down a belief that we do or don't have and give it to someone else, and they can infer things from it. So they're inferring things from it about what her mental state was.
But they don't inform her mental state. They're informed by her mental state.
Yeah. Although if she did then read it back, it might be, it might go, oh yeah.
Yeah. But again, she doesn't need to necessarily look that up. She doesn't need to keep that on her at all times in order to recall those things or in order to actually process those cognitively. they exist in there, and she could do it without the book. She might have slightly better recall if she read the book. So they might inform, but that isn't her mind as such, because that's removed from her cognitive processes, especially now that she's dead.
Yeah, that's fair. I suppose again, if it was more of a looking to the future, a future state thing, if she'd, rather than just a memory dump.
And they were supposed to be used, like, as far as I know, it's not, her diary wasn't just a description of her experiences. She wrote stories in them and other ideas and things like that. So what we're seeing is a private look into her mind rather than her mind itself.
Yeah. I guess
because, like I say, the extended mind hypothesis speaks about it informing cognition and being used as part of cognition on a regular basis and that kind of thing.
I mean, you could, I guess, say it could be an extension of memory, which you could say, well, memory is part of the mind, but not really on the same page as what we're talking about there. So you could say it is a form of extension to the mind, but it is not the extended mind hypothesis in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, think of it this way. When you listen to your favorite Anthrax track or AC/DC or whatever, is the vocals you're hearing a part of that person's voice, or are they just a recording of the voice?
Yes. But yeah, no, that's fair. It's the recording of their voice, isn't it? So,
which is what Anne Frank's diary would be. It would be a recording of her sensations and her experiences. Yeah,
that's fair. He also says, and this one is different but similar to the example of the dementia one that you mentioned. So what about someone with head trauma who is virtually a vegetable but has a fully functional smartphone full of data? Would it be honest to say they have a partially functional mind? So I assume, I mean, we're going to have to infer a little bit from this and say that they almost can't think, but the smartphone can inform them to do a few things.
But if they're so sort of cognitively debilitated, then it can't form any part of that person's mind.
So, I mean, in this regard, let's just assume that the smartphone can give them enough influence. Say they needed to, the smartphone full of data had things like a schedule in it, and they may not be able to necessarily form new beliefs themselves, but they could go, oh, I need to go and feed the cat. Oh, I need to go. And they have enough understanding to do these things, and then they might have, to feed the cat, you have to stand up and go over to that. And it tells them every little bit. Would you say that it's a partially functional mind in that regard?
I'd say in that regard, it helps to inform their mind and helps them to understand what they need to do. But removed from them, it's no longer a part of their mind. It's just a snapshot into their life.
Right. Yeah. Fair. And equally, if they were in a vegetative state where they couldn't act on the data, and they couldn't even read the data, even if they had originally written all that data in their smartphone, then you obviously wouldn't say they had a partly functional mind. They just had a data store.
Yeah.
What about the articles you've written on Answers in Reason? Are they a product of your mind or an extension of it? which we sort of brought up earlier, actually. I mean, they're obviously a product of our mind, but are they also an extension of it?
I'd say it was a product of it rather than an extension of it. I mean, if you're looking at extension in a different way to the extended hypothesis, extended mind hypothesis, you could say they're an extension of it because it's reached out into the world with your thoughts, but it's not an extension of your cognitive processes.
Yeah, makes sense. Hello, Alistair. I've just seen you pop in. Yes, philosophy of mind is definitely mind extending. Kimo also says, I've not read it, but Rupert Sheldrake's The Sense of Being Scared At, I'm told, suggests that our minds are not limited to our brains and are connected to other aspects of the external world. I've not read it either. Have you?
No, unfortunately not.
So, I mean, in that regard, by being connected to other aspects of the external world, is that talking about how we were speaking earlier? I mean, obviously, we don't know the content of the book, but would we say in the sense that the cognitive processes can be informed by the external world? You know, we see a tree that happened to look like one that we saw on holiday 3 years ago, and we go, "Oh yeah, I believe that I should go back to that place." You know, that there are external influences to a belief, or is that actually trying to say that there is more to it than that?
I would guess it means that our minds, like, they extend in sort of spatial terms. Just like the articles you write are an extension of your mind in the sense that it puts your thoughts outside of your brain. Our minds extend outwards because we're informed by the phenomenology that goes on around us, and that influence us. But I don't think they are part of the cognition in the same way that Chalmers and Clark describe.
Kimo, if you get a chance to read it, let us know if we guessed right. So the other comment that we got. Oh, hang on. The last one. So, obviously responding to the blurb, which might make this make a little bit more sense. It says, human knowledge is a set of volleyballs. We got to consistently try to keep passing to the next generations. Maybe a beach ball is a more accurate visual. Thankfully, all the volleyballs that are labelled with scientific facts tend not to deflate when they hit the ground, while all the rest do. But those with enough money can build quite some armour around their fragile little volleyball. Obviously, there's a bit of scientism in there. I think they're talking about. So we're talking about the extension of mind in, say, like a journal or a diary or anything like that. So he's talking about knowledge and the passing on of knowledge. And obviously, you've got to keep passing on the knowledge, and as we pass on knowledge, we also can continue from where people have left off and gain knowledge on top of that knowledge. And there's a certain amount of, we look back and we go, they believed this. These are the reasons they believed this. We can, in some circumstances, test and go, oh, okay, yeah, we believe that true. You don't always need to test to accept that true. There could be good enough justification there to accept it. So, and obviously knowledge is a subset of belief. So that's why I'm saying we believe that this knowledge is accurate, and we move on from there, and we can move forward. And So, in that regard, the passing on of knowledge, is that passing on a piece of your mind?
I'd say it could be in some sense. If you're the first scientist, you're passing on what you believe, but I'm not really sure it would count as part of the extended mind hypothesis because it's informing the base idea and putting the base idea in there, but it's not what you rely on to, like, it's not what you rely on for that information. So you don't keep those science books on you all the time, and you don't need to look at those science books all the time. And you begin your cognization from that information rather than that information being your cognization.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Yeah. The other argument we could also say is: are you passing on knowledge or are you passing on information? And I think there is
That's it.
a key difference there to be had.
I mean, if I hand over information about evolution to Ken Ham, and I hand over information about evolution to you, Ken Ham will reject it. It's the same information, but he won't believe it because he has other things, other ideologies that sort of cause him to reject it without it being part of the cognition and being part of his brain. And it doesn't become knowledge. It's the same piece of information. So whether it's knowledge depends on the person accepting it.
So in that regard,
yeah, I guess you could say it's recorded knowledge in the sense that information in a museum is recorded knowledge and you're talking about it from a different standpoint. And it's kind of a different conversation.
Yeah. So realistically speaking, we can't ever actually pass on knowledge. We can pass on information and help someone justify why they accept that information as true. But until that stage, you know, you can pass on information, you can help them justify it and accept it, but you're not really passing on knowledge at that stage. They're two different processes. You pass on the information, and then there's the other bit of it.
Yeah. But again, if you come at it from a slightly different situation where you could say knowledge in the sense of social awareness of certain ideas that are common within a society, that could still be considered a body of knowledge, but in a different way to personal knowledge.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
It makes it slightly more complicated, but it really depends on what you mean when you say knowledge.
Yeah. You're not talking about held knowledge, so you wouldn't necessarily be talking about a theory of knowledge. You'd be talking past each other if you're talking about it in that regard.
Yeah. Like you can have the big book of knowledge, which has all these facts and information, and it's considered a part of the body of human knowledge. But in a personal sense, unless you actually accept what's in that book to be true, it's not really knowledge to you.
Yeah.
It's a categorization of something else.
And equally, if this, you can't justify why you accept it as true past, well, it's in this book and I accept this book as true, can you even really call it knowledge then? It's just a belief.
Yeah, might be an informed belief, but if you don't know who wrote the book and it's just some generic book with no author's name, but it calls itself the body of knowledge, the fact that it happens to be true, you could say that it's just epistemic luck.
Yeah, interesting though. Kimo says, I took the Sheldrake book as being along the same lines as the EMT proposal.
I saw that one. Just quickly looked over as, yeah.
A caveat, the blurbs I've read also suggest the book may lean a bit towards parapsychology, ESP type stuff.
Still might be interesting to read, because even from some terrible ideas, we can glean some good information, or some things to give us pause for thought. Like the extended mind hypothesis itself. I don't necessarily accept it, but I think there is a lot in there that's good for informing thought and thinking about how our mind works and how it interacts with the external world.
Yeah, well, thinking about how we think and what informs our beliefs, and just going back to the gradient thing, I think that's my main takeaway from the night, when you actually start putting these differences side by side. And yes, okay, I see a big difference between the brain and the notepad, but when you put little steps in the way, and it's like, right, how many other little steps could there be in that as well? And then there probably are examples that if you were to grade it, you'd probably have a line of, I don't know, 50 data points, and then you go, well, so what is the point where A becomes B? Like,
yeah. And like, what's the relevant difference between a belief that's written down on a piece of paper and a belief that's in our mind? They're both roughly the same thing when you look at them at this way, but when you look at them at this way, it's a difference in kind, not just degree. They're not a type token kind of thing. Both are types in and of themselves.
That's great. Did you have anything else you thought we should cover on it, though, Dave?
The only thing I can really remember is Mark Rowlands has also written an exceptional paper on this, and it goes through arguments against and arguments for. It's been a long time since I read it, so I can't quite remember the details, but I remember it being very useful when I was in my first year. Because we're going way back now with this.
Were you named after him?
I wish. Imagine how well I would have done at philosophy if I'd have had somebody like that in my family.
So is there no relation at all?
No.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah, and it's quite a good... Like, the first time I read it, I saw read this paper by Mark Rowlands, it was like, what?
That's fun, isn't it?
And sometimes from... what's the name of the place with all the papers? Sorry, my brain's gone numb.
The place with the papers. What sort of papers are you talking about?
Like academics upload. I think it's academia.
Oh, academia.edu, I think it is.
Yeah, I sometimes get notifications through from them that say your name has been mentioned in 12 papers.
Yeah,
and then when I look, it actually says Mark Rowlands.
Well, there's actually a Joe Johnstone, and in fact, Graham Oppie has even quoted a paper from a Joe Johnstone, and I was like, and I got the notification through, and I was like, what the hell is Oppie doing quoting me? God. But yeah, and that's probably why Oppie follows me on academia.edu, because he thinks I'm that guy, and I'm really not.
Nobody follows me.
Right, I've only got one follower on there. And
no, I think I've got about 5, but I never actually upload anything to it.
Neither do I. I'm nowhere near well informed enough to put stuff up there. And generally, it's a really good resource. Although occasionally there are some bits on there that I'm like, how did this get through?
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to actually show that you're an academic. You can just join and upload papers.
Oh, no. No, don't tell people that. We've just said that publicly on YouTube. You realize how many trolls are going to get on it right away. Not many, because no one watches us.
Yeah. We only get like 4 viewers a week, so...
Awesome.
So yeah, that's about it. I just thought it would be a nice quick one. I know we're both tired and our brains aren't quite functioning this evening, so I thought a nice quick sort of thought experiment but slightly
good.
more than a thought experiment might be an interesting discussion.
I'm glad we did it actually, and it's don't know if it's good or not, but I don't feel quite as tired as I did. It's got me thinking about something in a new way again, and I always enjoy these conversations where I'm left going, yeah. In my head, I'm still on the gradient. As I said, I need to find that point where I see the difference. Yes,
Same.
hey Rev, great to see you here. I am sorry we are going to be ending really shortly. Just want to say on Thursday we are doing another stream called well, it's a reaction and video review from Anti-Citizen X's The Stagnation of Philosophy. A few people have basically sent this one to us. It's quite funny actually how many different people have thrown this one in. I've not watched the video because I quite like having a fresh reaction to the videos that we watch. So very rarely do I watch them in advance. But I know you've watched it, haven't you, Dave? And I think Phil has, and Kevin.
Yeah,
has.
I've watched it the once. Yeah. I probably need to rewatch it and take some notes and stuff like that. But
that'd be good.
Go at it from a fresh thing as well. Yeah.
So yeah, Kevin also wants to join us. So I don't know if you remember, but Kevin was with us for a couple of streams last year. He's French Canadian who is also studying philosophy.
And he's brilliant.
He is absolutely brilliant. The last stream he was on was a bit of a fun one that we did, which was superhero morality, which was just before Christmas. But we're really looking forward to having Kevin back on the show with us. And I know Philip wants to be there for that video as well. So there'll be 4 of us on Thursday watching and reviewing. And yeah, it seems like this person's got quite a bleak view of philosophy, which I also find interesting, though, because from scanning down the list of the videos that they had, there seemed to be a lot of philosophical content. Now, I've not watched anything that they've had. They even on their stream or on their blog, it says philosophy engineered. And it's just one of those things of, okay, so where do we go with this? Do they actually have an appreciation for philosophy but are just pointing out some issues? Or is it as dark as some other people have made out to me? Because it's been made out that it's quite a bad take.
I remember there being some bad takes in it, but also some interesting ideas and some stuff I could sort of relate to. Opie says he's not anti-philosophy.
Fair.
And, you know, Opie knows, and he seems to know the guy's previous content, so...
Yeah, that's fair enough. So maybe it's something that actually needs to be addressed, and maybe we'll have some answers, and, you know, maybe there'll be some things we're left going...
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I mean, again, that's one of the things we should be critiquing our own. And if he's a philosophy guy and he's critiquing philosophy, that's kind of what philosophy is about. It's also about critiquing our own.
Yeah, most definitely. Good critical thought. As we've been saying,
Yeah.
We can't sit here doing the streams that we do, talking about how, you know, we atheists need to look at the things that we're saying and doing, and then turn around and go, oh yeah, but no, you can't say bad things about philosophy.
Can't touch philosophy. That's the sacred cow. Yeah, it can't really be done.
No. I mean, you can say that about anything. It's kind of like that scientific comment earlier, the part of it where it said, you know, thankfully the volleyballs labelled with scientific facts tend not to deflate. I mean, that's a bad take on it, really. I mean, science is an excellent method of investigation. It really is. It is an incredibly rigorous form of induction, but at the end of the day, that is all it is. You peel
And
it
not
back.
just that, if you start thinking of it as infallible, you're turning it into something it's not meant to be, which is dogma and sort of untouchable and beyond reproach. And it would also lead to a lot of bad scientific takes because, well, science has said it, therefore it must be right. Doesn't matter that the scientist was a bit of a bumbling idiot and a nutty professor. It's science. It must be right. I mean, there's been a lot of bad things that have come out of science. If you think about was it called the Tuskegee experiments, where they injected African Americans with, I can't remember what disease it was, something like gonorrhea or something like that. They
Really?
were testing something out on them, but they told them it was vaccinations for something else, when instead they were actually just giving them the live virus to see what happens. That was informed by government and informed by corrupt thinking, obviously, but it could still come under the banner of science because they were doing methodical testing.
Yeah, and equally, Andrew Wakefield, under the banner of science, showed his work, but obviously it was not true, and people were paid off to end up with these results, which led to a big part of the whole anti-vax thing.
Exactly. Science might weed them out, but not everybody buys the new science because the other science has already informed their beliefs and has spoken to something that makes them want that to be true. Science, yeah, like Rev says, Nazi science,
Yeah.
I'll have to look up. Yeah, maybe it wasn't gonorrhea. Cheers, Ansfrida.
So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, science is a method of investigation, and the scientific method helps us have this rigorous form of induction. Syphilis, fair.
That's what, yeah.
But it's not perfect, and that's the good thing about science, is it is not perfect, and it knows it's not perfect, and it ought to constantly be trying to improve itself. So when something happens, you go, oh, actually, no, this scientific fact wasn't a fact at all. We were wrong. Or, actually, we've got half the story, but here's the other half. Sometimes it's an incomplete fact or something like that. So that is the good thing about science. Science is bloody great, but I find there is too much reverence for science at the same time, especially in the online atheist and skeptic communities. There does seem to be a bit where we leave our brains at the door with it. Science said it, so it must be true.
I mean, like you said, most scientists say, no, what we say shouldn't be taken as infallible. Everything we say is fallible. It might be corrected in the future. We might be wrong. It's usually the science enthusiasts that are the ones talking in the sense that, yeah, science, occasionally it gets it wrong, but most of the time it's absolutely right. Well, yeah.
Yeah. As Rev says, atheists need their dogma as well. and that is the thing. I mean, that there are a lot in the online atheist and skeptic community that do turn science into a dogma. It's a big shame. So, yeah. Sorry, I got a bit off topic there.
That's all right. It's an interesting topic.
But yes, coming back into it. So if you'd like to join us on Thursday for the review of the Stagnation of Philosophy, I'd especially like it if there can be people there that point out if we're being a bit too biased as well, because it helps having other people tell you to check your bias, because we all have them. Biases are natural.
Not
And
me. I'm extremely rational.
but yeah, honestly, if you guys can come in and just let us know if ever we're being too charitable to philosophy and not taking on board the criticism or having a good enough justification for why we reject a particular criticism that he might bring up, then that would be really helpful. Because I mean, that's what this is about. We want to we don't just critique our own as in the atheist sense. We critique each other, and we want you guys to critique us. We're all here together, trying to lift each other up and be better than we were yesterday.
Yeah, well put. And it also helps us stop something we were talking about last week, where how do we know when we fall into an echo chamber?
Yes, most definitely. Cool. Well, I mean, that's it for tonight, unless you had anything to add, Dave?
Nope. Just thank you for the discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. I do have one more thing to add. If you haven't seen it already, check out Dave's video on Answers in Reason that he released yesterday. It was yesterday, wasn't it, Dave? It's called
I think so.
Atheists, Echo Chambers, and Dunning-Kruger, which, honestly, it's really, really, really
Being
good.
a critical thinker.
I'm going to put you a link into the chat room now. But anyone who is catching the rerun, hopefully I'll remember to put a link to it. This is something that I think is an incredibly good critique of atheists and the echo chambers and the Dunning-Kruger effect and the times that it's listed incorrectly. And one of the responses we got from this video as well was actually great. So it's someone that has always been incredibly polite. They've occasionally pointed out, and this is one thing I like about them as well, they've occasionally pointed out when I have written something in a biased way that's not necessarily been my intent, but reading it back through their eyes has made me go, oh God, yes, I do sound like I'm being very black and white with this topic. What I mean is this, and just to show you that that's what I mean, I've written an entire article saying that, but you have shown me that I need to modify my language when I'm having this discussion in a live thing. So, and one of the things that they said was about your Twitter posts that you're in there, and they said some of these Twitter posts are downright cringe-inducing. I'm really starting to see where you guys are coming from now. There seem to be a lot of atheists who are emboldened by the rhetoric of certain prominent figures to be outspoken, but without really understanding what they're being outspoken about. To be perfectly honest, I think what's taking me so long to come round on this is that people I see criticising atheists are, in my view, themselves often totally unhinged, ignorant, or wanting to flaunt their own egos on the internet. I don't get this from you guys, just for the record. For example, one common narrative that I hear all too often is that the American atheists arbitrarily redefined atheism as a ploy to gain political power, when in actuality, secularists have pushed the broad definition of atheism since the birth of secularism in the 19th century England. And it's nothing to do with a power grab, if only it was that simple. Whatever the founder of AA, as in the American Atheist, said about her agenda seems irrelevant to show this simple fact. But it's probably also twisted to fit the conspiracy. And this is something that is true. Now, I will say that the broad definition may well have been popularized by political parties because it means that they have a wider group of people that they can say, right, you're all atheists, right? They didn't invent it. In fact, you look down the etymology article I uploaded, and you can see the definition changing. But you can see how this because they are using it for a political purpose, they have politicized and popularized this definition through online mediums and social media. You can see how it gets twisted by people who are being critical of the lack of belief definition, and all of a sudden they're making claims saying that it was the American atheists that redefined it. And that is showing a lack of critical thought as well. They're pointing out other people's lack of critical thought for accepting the American atheists' only definition of atheism, but they're forgetting to actually go, well, where did I get this information from? Have I actually looked into the different uses of atheism over time, and found out when it was first suggested that it should be does not believe, absent of belief, lack of belief, and all the other definitions. I mean, even practical atheism has been round, and that was even used on certain theists. So there is a rich history to the term atheism. And it's great that you try and educate people that it's not only a lack of belief in gods, but doing that with false information is just as bad.
Yeah, it's kind of enforcing the cycle, but just from a different end.
Yeah, most definitely. Of course, there is other comments on there as well. My favourite one, who we think we know who it is. If nothing else, this was a great example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm trying to work out whether it's his statement he's referring to or the video.
I mean, I probably got some stuff wrong, but and there is some hyperbole in there as well, just for effect. But I think the general argument is good enough to get people thinking about where they got their information from, why they believe it. And that was the purpose of it.
Yeah, and it's great. So honestly, please check out Dave's video.
The guy you're speaking of, is it Kind Nine? Nine Kind? Something like that?
Not the Dunning-Kruger one.
Yeah, the comment you read out.
Yeah.
But he also says, it seemed like a pretty reasonable criticism to him.
Yes, yeah, definitely. But it was, that was in a different message. But the acknowledgement of, I can see why you guys are actually being critical of atheists. Because he hadn't seen the sort of stuff that we'd had with I don't believe it, I accept it, and all of the bad epistemology and bad takes on history and philosophy in general. And suddenly, seeing some evidence of this, and obviously it's a tiny amount of what we've seen over the years with these arguments, suddenly going, oh crap, okay, yeah, it does make sense that you're making the videos that you do and focusing a lot of them at atheists, because we do need to be better, because we do claim to be these smarter, more rational, more moral beings, and yet you look at these messages on Twitter and you go, fuck, maybe we're not.
I mean, you speaking about Kind Nine's comment has also given me a good idea to think about for a future stream. The commodification of atheism.
Commodification of atheism?
Turning it into a saleable product. So t-shirts, books.
Which has been done.
And say the AA going for the lack of belief definition and pushing that this is the only definition and trying to envelope others. Like Kind Nine says, this definition has existed a long time, but there may be an agenda behind the American atheist usage, or say Randolph Richardson's usage. He's trying to commodify and sell atheism, so to make money off of it. So that might be something to think about.
Yeah, no, that is good. And you see it. You see people doing all the T-shirts and books. And
it's not done just in a way to inform, but it's also done in a way to sell a product and keep people coming back for that product.
Yeah, well, you rile people up and get them pissed off about, the non-atheism. And all of a sudden, they, as you say, they keep buying the product again and again and again. And
they create a closed group of people who will not deviate from that product.
Yeah, most definitely. And yes, Ansfarida, in regards to your comment, the AAACA, AXP, they pushed the lack of belief for political reasons, and they still do. Now, that is true that they pushed for it, but they didn't redefine it. And I think that's the thing. Some people say, make the claim that they basically redefined atheism, and they don't redefine atheism. Even Aaron Ra doesn't redefine atheism. He thinks that that's the original definition, and therefore it's the right one, which is an etymological fallacy, and it's wrong because it wasn't the original definition anyway. So he's managed to be like doubly wrong there. But the definition has been round for a while, and depending on how you take things like does not believe, you could argue it's been round for longer than we realise. But for it to be the absent of belief and lack of belief definition, I mean, even that is. Oh God, I'm trying to remember. The first time I saw absent of belief in the dictionary definition was 1948, but that doesn't mean that it didn't come out before that. But even then, near enough 100 years of that. And some people do equate does not believe with absent of belief and lack of belief. And they've got their reasons. I've written an article about why you shouldn't take it that way, but at the end of the day, language is a descriptive thing, and if they mean the same thing by it, it doesn't really matter how I think they ought to be using the language. But if they have meant the same thing, and then you can go back and say, yeah, that the definition's been around, at least a century and a half, I think it was, if not more. But
one word I will say that they are currently redefining is anti-theism.
Oh, yeah. That one pisses me off. Again, that's why I wrote that article, Hitchens on anti-theism. Because so many atheists look up to Hitchens as what it means to be an atheist and what it means to be an anti-theist. But then they will go on to say that believing gods don't exist is anti-theism. And I mean, anti is against or opposed to. That's what anti means. Whereas the A can either mean without or negation, and if you use it as the negation version, you're negating the belief or proposition that God exists. So it becomes God does not exist, or the belief God does not exist, and that is not the same as being an anti-theist. You're not necessarily against theism because you believe gods don't exist. So I don't get how you can get anti, anti-abortion. Is that the belief abortions don't exist?
I mean, even applying the principle of charity here, if we take, say, anti to mean in the same way as anti-clockwise, in other words, the opposite of clockwise, so we can say, yes, you can define it that way. But then what word do they use to define someone who is opposed to belief in God?
Do you know, after we made that critique, Randolph changed his definition on the site, and he now has both the belief gods don't exist or being opposed to gods as being anti-theist.
Oh, I haven't looked at the site for a long time.
Yeah. So I did find that funny. He actually changed his definition there as well.
We've influenced him a few times to actually change that site. I mean, the information that he's changed to isn't much better, but
you know what?
Sometimes even worse.
Yeah, but at least it shows that he's taken on board criticism and tried to correct it, even if his corrections were also wrong. But that shows too. But yeah, I think it's going the. It's not necessarily going the opposite though with the anti-clockwise. I know people say take it to be opposite.
It's going against the clockwise direction.
Yeah, against. Yeah. So that's how it's. I know people say it's the opposite because that's the end result. It's going the opposite way, but it doesn't actually mean opposite in that regard. It's just you link. What does it mean? It means it's going the opposite direction. But yeah, it's going
and
against.
You could say
the clockwise.
antimatter. Antimatter isn't just the opposite of matter; it destroys matter.
Yeah. So there is a bit different, a bit of a difference with that one. couple more comments have just come in. Rev says Atheitits does have good marketing potential as t-shirts. It's a good idea. We should do it.
Merch store.
Kimo says, even Anthony Flew acknowledges in his silly 72 paper Presumption of Atheism that the normative view of atheism is the disbelief in God's position. He simply wanted to change it. And he does. You know, that's the thing. He does acknowledge it's a common view. And actually, his paper wasn't that silly. I disagree with, you know, calling it positive and negative atheism, but when we actually went through, I mean, we didn't go in depth to every bit. We read a few of the sections of the paper. The method that he had as an investigation about gods was quite a good way to go about it. To take a negative position and say, well, you know, tell me about this God. Describe this God to me. What's the characteristics of this God? You know, and why should I accept these characteristics? And take an almost atheist stance combined with well, I'm here, I'm willing to listen. So it wasn't exactly being agnostic. It was more sort of being atheist with a method of investigation, saying that you're open to the critique. And actually, Flew clearly was open to the critique and was eventually convinced and became a deist. So there you go. Someone finally gave him a definition, and then he went,
Well, what convinced him was the design argument.
That's a shame.
Yeah. And a couple of other things, but it was, as far as I understand, it was mostly, you know, the intuition of design that kind of tipped him over.
Just one that's popped up. And Srida says, Americans often say counterclockwise. So what's a counter-atheist? But then I suppose, counterclockwise. So anti-clockwise is counterclockwise. So it would be a counter-theist, wouldn't it? So if you were to counter a theist, it's sort of, when you put it in that terms, you know, you're against them.
Hence why counter-apologetics, apologetic lines of argument meant to discredit apologetics.
Yeah. So anyone going on about... I mean, I know language is descriptive and you can use anything to be anything. And I've said it before. I mean, if you want to say that an atheist is anyone that has ever picked their nose, well, every child has ever picked their nose. So therefore, everybody on this planet is an atheist. You can do that. But realistically, language is also supposed to be about effective communication. And there are words that are in place that have quite specific uses. And, you know, anti has one, and it seems a shame that you can give an example of how anti is used in everything and then go, yeah, but for when we use it for theists, anti-theists, it means something else. Really?
The other thing as well is that it situates the conversation in different areas. You know, okay, you use the term anti-theist like that, but you're having a different conversation to those who use anti-theist in this way, and you arguing that you using it this way means they can't use it that way. It just creates a big mess.
Yeah, most definitely. Brilliant's got one. A counter-atheist is one bought from the store. Brilliant. Yeah, cool. Sorry for the random chatter at the end there.
No, that was good. It was fun.
But yeah, folks. So in case you've forgotten, in the last half an hour of me going on about random shit, Thursday we are going to be covering off, doing a live video review of citizen. What's his name again? I need got
Anti-Citizen X.
Anti-Citizen X's. That's it. God, see, I'm tired. Sorry. Anti-Citizen X's The Stagnation of Philosophy. And as I've said, if you guys can all be there to keep us in check and make sure that we're not being biased in our response and our reactions, that would be absolutely fantastic. But that's it for tonight. Now, I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And you've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. Have a good night, all.
Good night, all. And thanks for joining us tonight.